I used to believe that hard work and humility would be enough. That if you woke up before the sun, scrubbed your nails clean after long shifts, paid your dues without complaint, and treated everyone with decency, you'd earn respect in this world. But what no one tells you is that some people only measure your worth by the number on your paycheck, the title on your business card, or the brand stitched onto your handbag. Especially when those people are your in-laws. My name is Marin Blakely, and I fix boots for a living. Well, technically, I'm a cobbler and leather repair specialist. I own a tiny shop on a crooked corner in the town of Kessler, population 3,891, give or take a newborn or two. My little storefront sits between a laundromat that smells like mildew and an antique store owned by a woman named Doris, who calls every customer sweetie and chain smokes behind the counter. I work alone. It's just me, my tools, the hiss of hot glue, and the stubborn grit of worn leather. I love it. It's honest work. It's the kind of work where you can see the results of your effort with every stitch. It's not glamorous, but it keeps my soul full, even when my bank account isn't. But to my in-laws, my job was a joke. They lived 25 minutes out of town, past the gravel roads and into the sprawl of their family-owned farm, a wide, weathered estate known to everyone around here as the Hartley property. Because yes, I married into the Hartley family, the Hartleys of Hartley Farm, the family whose cattle shows up on menus at the fanciest steakhouse in the county. And I was the town cobbler who couldn't even afford central air in her shop. The first time I met them, it was over a stiff dinner and overcooked pork. I wore my best dress, blue with yellow roses, and brought a homemade lemon cake because my own mother raised me right. When I shook hands with Diane Hartley, my future mother-in-law, her eyes fell to the slight crack in my thumbnail, and her smile faltered just long enough for me to notice. "A shoemaker," she said, almost like a question. "A cobbler," I corrected gently, trying not to sound defensive, "and leather restoration. Handbags, saddles, belts, anything that's been loved too long." She hummed. That was the first hum. There would be many more. She and her husband Roy weren't cruel outright. Not in the way that makes good gossip. No, their disapproval was a slow, dripping faucet. A quiet insult tucked into a compliment. A joke that hovered just long enough to sting. "Marin fixed up one of Roy's old work belts," Diane once told a neighbor at a 4th of July picnic. "Saved us a whole $20. Isn't she just resourceful?" They never asked about my business. Never visited my shop. At family gatherings, they'd brag about their other son's girlfriend, Camille, a marketing executive in Dallas who wore heels that clicked like power. Then they'd turn to me and say something like, "Still gluing shoes together, Marin?" And I'd smile. Because what else can you do when it's not just about you anymore? You see, I loved my husband Luke. Still do, though I sometimes questioned why he never spoke up. He was a good man. Quiet, kind, gentle with animals, and always the first to shovel a neighbor's driveway without being asked. But when it came to his parents, he shrank. He'd wrap his arm around me at the dinner table, but he'd stay silent when Diane laughed about my calloused hands. "You know they don't mean anything by it," he'd say afterward, brushing my hair behind my ear. But they did. They meant everything by it. I tolerated it for 3 years. Then the letter came. It was a Friday. The kind of day that starts with a spilled cup of coffee and ends with a thunderstorm. I was fixing a pair of boots for old Mr. Callahan when the mailman slid a thick envelope through the shop's mail slot. I didn't open it right away. Figured it was some kind of boring farm invite or another charity auction flyer. When I finally tore it open, I had to read the first line 3 times. Notice of auction, Hartley Farm Estate, property foreclosure. I dropped the envelope. It didn't make sense. Roy and Diane were land rich. Cattle contracts, government subsidies. How could they be? I drove to the farm that evening, letter in hand. The sun was bleeding into the fields when I pulled up, and Roy was out by the barn, shoveling hay with his back turned. "Is this real?" I asked without greeting, holding out the envelope. He didn't take it. "We're handling it," he said gruffly. Diane appeared on the porch, arms crossed, her mouth thin. "It's a misunderstanding, we've got it covered." But their eyes said something else. I wasn't supposed to know. I left that night with my heart thudding and a thought growing louder by the second. They were losing the farm. We had 90 days. But no one, not Roy, not Diane, not even Luke, would know it was me. Not yet. Because the woman they mocked for gluing boots and fixing zippers was about to buy their legacy right out from under them. And it would be legal. Cold. Brutal. But fair. I kept my head down and smiled through dinners. I hugged Diane when she cried about their temporary trouble. I nodded when Roy swore that an investor was interested, all while I made calls, filed paperwork, and slowly moved my savings into a shell company. I became anonymous. Invisible. And the more desperate they became, the more determined I was. 3 weeks before the auction, Diane cornered me in the kitchen after Sunday dinner. "You've been quiet lately," she said, sipping her wine. "Everything okay at the little shop?" "Everything's good," I said evenly. "I've had a few new opportunities pop up." She tilted her head. "Is that so?" I smiled. "I've learned a lot about acquisitions recently." She blinked. I held her gaze just long enough. 2 weeks later, I signed the first bidder document. Roy had no idea. Neither did the other bidders. And Luke? Well, Luke was about to find out. Because the day before the auction, he found my paperwork. He stood in the doorway of our bedroom, holding the file, his face pale. "You're the buyer?" I looked up from the suitcase I was packing. "I'm Shinmargar Buyer," I said. "Technically, it's a company I own. Why wouldn't you tell me?" I stood slowly, meeting his eyes. "Because your loyalty is to them, you'd try to stop me. They're my parents, Marin. And I'm your wife. And for 3 years, I watched them laugh at me, dismiss me. You never stood up for me. I didn't think you cared. I did, and I still do. But that farm? It's going under, and someone's going to own it. Better me than some stranger." He sat down on the edge of the bed, rubbing his hands through his hair. "What are you going to do if you win?" I zipped the suitcase closed. "I'm going to let them rent it, at market rate, and I'm going to put my name on the deed." He looked up. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." The next morning, I walked into that auction house with my head held high. Diane was there, in a blazer too tight at the seams, clutching Roy's arm like a lifeline. They didn't see me at first. But they would. Because when the auctioneer cleared his throat and opened the first round of bidding, my number went up. Again. And again. Until there was no one left. Just me. And a silence so thick you could sew through it. Sold. The gavel fell. Diane turned slowly, her eyes scanning the room, and when they landed on me, her mouth parted. Like she couldn't believe it. Like she finally saw me for the first time. And I smiled. Because I had just bought her entire farm. Fair and square. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow I have a special story for you. Chuntape sub story for you. The auction house emptied faster than I expected. Chairs scraped the floor. Murmurs rippled behind me like a swarm of angry bees, and the scent of polished wood and stale cigar smoke clung to the air. I stood where I was, letting the shockwaves of realization wash over me. My number flashed on the screen, B42, and beneath it, in stark black letters, Hartley Farm, sold to bidder. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. The gavel's echo still thrummed in my chest. My hands were slick with sweat. I pictured Diane's face just moments ago. Disbelief, betrayal, a flicker of understanding that finally, at last, she'd seen me. "Congratulations," a stranger said, patting me on the shoulder. I nodded, offered a tight smile, and turned toward the door. Every step felt surreal, as if I were watching someone else's body move through space. I clenched my purse strap, knuckles white. Outside, the sky had shifted to a bruised purple. Summer storms were rolling in, and distant thunder rumbled like a caged bear. I hailed a taxi, not my usual old jalopy, and climbed inside, careful not to look back. Luke was waiting in our car when it pulled up, His face was tense, eyes dark. I swallowed and stepped out, the rain starting in quick cold drops. "Did you win?" he asked, words taut as wire. I nodded, pulling the collar of my jacket up against the wind. "I did." He closed the door behind me. You bought the farm." "I bought it," I corrected quietly, "under a company, but yes, it's mine." He paced around the car, boots splashing in puddles. "Why didn't you tell me?" I stared at his damp coat, the way his hair curled against his forehead. "Because I had to do it alone," I said softly, "because you would have tried to stop me. Because for too long, I let them belittle me, let them see me as less." He stopped, the thunder rolling again. "But, Marin, they're your family too." I turned to face him, raindrops sliding down my cheeks like tears I couldn't afford. "Not anymore." I climbed into the passenger seat, heart pounding. The taxi disappeared around the corner, leaving us alone. Luke sat in the driver's seat, hands gripping the wheel. "You know what this means, right?" he said, voice hollow. "They're going to hate you, and they'll fight it." I turned the key in the ignition. The engine coughed to life. "Let them," I said. "They'll have to. I'm not scared anymore." He didn't respond. He stared out into the night as I guided the car down the gravel road, headlights cutting through the haze. We passed empty fields, the silhouette of the old barn looming like a shamed giant in the darkness. When we reached our driveway, Luke parked without speaking. The rain led up to a soft drizzle. We sat in silence for a moment. "I'll call a lawyer tomorrow," I said, "to finalize everything, change the locks, set up a board. Treat it like a business, as it is." He exhaled slowly. "And what about them?" I reached into my bag and pulled out the auction documents. I traced my finger over the smudged ink of my signature. Well, my company's name. "I'm giving them a lease," I said. 1 year. Market rate. No special discounts. If they want to stay, they'll pay." His jaw clenched. "Market rate." "Yes, they called my work small. They said I'd never amount to anything. So now, they can rent from me." Luke looked at me then, really looked, as though seeing me for the first time. His eyes softened, but there was pain there too. "Marin," he whispered. I opened the door, stepping out into the damp air. Storm clouds churned overhead, lit by occasional lightning. The wind picked up, swirling around me. I breathed in deep, tasting earth and rain. "I did what I had to do," I said. "It's not about revenge, it's about respect." He joined me outside, closing the car door. He stood close, warmth radiating through his coat. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly. I blinked against the rain. "You are?" He nodded. "I should have stood by your side. I'm sorry." My chest tightened. "It's not too late." He reached for my hand. "Tell me you'll let me help now." I hesitated, but then the clouds parted just enough for a shaft of moonlight to break through. I let his hand close over mine. "Yes," I whispered, "but on my terms." He squeezed my fingers. "Always." We walked into the house together, feet wet, hearts pounding. Inside, I pulled my laptop from the dining table. Dozens of emails from bankers, lawyers, and farm managers had arrived in the last hour. The fire in the hearth crackled, and the scent of damp wood filled the air. I opened a fresh document. The first headline read, "Hartley Farm Operations Management." Underneath, bullet points mapped out my plan. Restructure debt, secure lines of credit, hire new farmhands, pivot to organic produce markets I'd been researching, and most importantly, build a direct-to-consumer brand using the Hartley name's prestige. Luke hovered behind me, reading over my shoulder. "It's ambitious," he said softly. I traced a point with my finger. "It needs to be. If we're going to survive the first year, we need growth, diversification. I've lined up a partnership with that roast beef distributor in Chicago. They want exclusive rights to our cattle once we kick off grass-fed certification." His eyebrows rose. "Chicago." I nodded. "If we land that, we'll cover the lease and then some, and then we can refinance their old loans at a better rate." He sighed, a sound that was almost relief. "I think we can do this." I saved the document, closed the laptop, and looked at him. "Tomorrow," I said, turning toward the window, We deliver eviction notices. Luke's face went pale. Eviction notices? I nodded. It's legal. They'll have 90 days to renegotiate their lease with us, or leave. His breath hitched. Marin, are you sure? I pressed my hand to the glass, staring out at the fields that once belonged to them. I am. And in that moment I realized how thin the line is between justice and cruelty. How power changes you, even when you deserve it. Because when the sun rose the next morning, Hartley Farm would answer to me. The knock on the Hartley farmhouse door came at precisely 9 a.m. Luke and I stood together on the porch, him fidgeting with the manila envelope in his hands, me staring straight ahead, spine straight as rebar. The sun was barely above the horizon, casting a clean gold light over the front fields, gilding every broken fence post, every rusting tractor part, every weed-cracked path. Diane opened the door. She didn't speak at first. Her eyes flicked to the envelope, to Luke, then to me. Her gaze lingered longer than usual. What's this? She said at last, voice tight. Luke held it out, his hand shaking ever so slightly. It's from the new ownership team, he said. Roy appeared behind her, his broad frame blocking most of the hallway. He looked older, tired, like the years had caught up overnight. Diane opened the envelope with stiff fingers. As she read, her face went slack. You're evicting us. No, I said carefully, I'm offering you a lease, at market rate. You have 90 days to accept or vacate. It's a legal notice. You're not being thrown out overnight. Market rate, Roy echoed, as if the words were foreign. It's standard, I said, just like you'd expect from any other investor. Diane's eyes were glassy now. You said you loved this family. I did, I replied, but love doesn't mean being a doormat. Roy stepped forward, his expression crumbling into something halfway between anger and disbelief. You've turned on us. I gave you a chance, I said. You ignored it. I didn't do this to hurt you. I did it because it was smart business. If someone else bought this farm, they'd bulldoze half the land and slap a strip mall on it. I'm giving you an option to stay. Silence hung between us like heavy smoke. Luke didn't speak. Diane looked away. You blindsided us, Roy muttered. I met his gaze. You laughed at me for 3 years. I guess we're even. Then I turned and walked back down the porch steps, each bootfall echoing like punctuation marks on a page I was finally writing. Back at the shop, I threw myself into the operations plan. The office I'd never really used became my war room. Dry erase boards lined the walls. Contracts scattered across the desk. I hired 2 assistants, Maya, a former logistics coordinator from Memphis, and Derek, a local agricultural consultant who used to work with state farming boards. Together, we started making Hartley Farm more than just a name. It became a brand. I printed the new letterhead myself, Hartley Farms Cooperative. The first public press release went out the same week. It announced the farm's relaunch, teased partnerships with eco-conscious distributors, and offered a glimpse into the new initiatives, including community-produced boxes and local internships for agricultural students. Within 48 hours, the local paper called for an interview. I declined, choosing instead to send a public letter. This land has a legacy, and I intend to honor it. But legacies don't excuse bad decisions, and family names aren't shields from accountability. This farm was on the brink. Now it has a future. The town buzzed. I became the woman who turned the tables. Quiet, boot-mending Marin Blakely, who once fixed handbags in a windowless shop, now stood at the head of a growing agricultural enterprise. People I barely knew began stopping me on the street. About time someone showed them what grit really looks like, said Mr. Lowry from the grain elevator. They never saw you coming, grinned Doris from the antique shop. But not everyone was cheering. One afternoon, as I was reviewing marketing mock-ups for the new Hartley grass-fed label, a stone shattered the front window of my shop. I dropped to the ground instinctively. Glass tinkled like wind chimes. My heart hammered in my chest. I crawled forward and peeked through the broken window frame. The street was empty, no one in sight. But I found the rock inside. Taped to it was a note, in bold marker. Times *. Go back to fixing shoes. *. My hands trembled as I peeled the paper away, not because I was scared, but because I realized this wasn't just backlash. It was resentment from people who couldn't stomach a woman doing what men around here had failed to do. I stood and called the police. They took a report, but we both knew it wouldn't lead anywhere. That night, Luke came home late. He looked exhausted. "My mother's not speaking to me," he said. "She says you're humiliating them." I didn't look up from my laptop. They're lucky I gave them an option at all. He slumped into a chair. "I keep thinking if I'd just helped you sooner." "You weren't ready to see the truth," I said, shutting the lid. "Now you do. So let's move forward." He nodded slowly. My throat tightened. Luke leaned forward, voice trembling. "But if she were here, she'd say you're the one she hoped for. Someone who wouldn't let this place rot." I covered his hand with mine. The house was silent for a long time. The wind howled outside. Day 33 of the 90-day notice period, Roy requested a meeting. I agreed. We sat at the long dining table inside the farmhouse, once theirs, now leased by the week. Diane didn't attend. Roy looked thinner. His hands fidgeted with the rim of his mug. "I've been farming this land since I was 15, he said. "I know," I replied. "That's why I'm giving you the option to stay. I can't afford market rate." I tapped the folder in front of me. "I've outlined a performance-based partnership. You hit production benchmarks, you get reductions. But you'll be audited quarterly, no games." He nodded slowly. "You were always underestimated," he muttered. I said nothing. He looked up. "I don't like you much, Marin." "That's mutual," I said calmly. "But I respect what you did." That surprised me. He stood, extending a hand. "I'll sign." I took his hand. "Then we'll move forward." But as I left the house, a voice echoed from the hallway. "Don't think I've forgiven you." Diane. I turned to see her in the shadows, arms folded, face like granite. "I don't need your forgiveness," I said, "just your cooperation." She scoffed. "You'll regret this." I smiled thinly. "I haven't yet." And I walked out. The next morning, my shop phone rang. It was Maya. "You need to come now," she said. "It's the cattle pens." "What happened?" "They're on fire." My blood ran cold. I dropped everything and bolted. When I reached the farm, black smoke curled into the sky. Fire trucks were already dousing the flames. Roy stood near the fence, face ashen, barking into his phone. Luke grabbed my arm. "It's arson." My stomach twisted. "How bad?" "3 pens gone, 2 cattle dead, the rest are scattered across the field." I turned to the fire chief. "Do you know who did this?" He shook his head. "Not yet, but it was intentional. Gasoline was found." My heart thudded. Because this wasn't just resentment anymore. It was war. And someone wanted to burn me out. Question tour to be continued. Goal to the question. The night after the fire, I didn't sleep. Not even a minute. I sat at my desk with a cold cup of coffee, the burn scars of the cattle pens etched in my mind, watching footage from the security cameras we'd installed just a week before. Every few seconds, I scanned the grainy footage, rewinding, pausing, zooming. At 2:41 a.m., a figure moved along the fence line. Hooded, fast, confident. At 2:43, the fire started. By 2:45, flames were everywhere. I paused the footage, stared at the silhouette. Something about the gate, the way they moved. It felt familiar. Too familiar. I forwarded it to Maya with a single line. Choose asterisk. Start identifying this person. Use every contact you have. Asterisk. By morning, the fire was officially ruled arson. Insurance would cover only a fraction of the damage. We lost 2 prized heifers, an entire feed line, and half our fencing. Luke stayed at the farm all night, helping Roy and Derek manage the chaos. Diane didn't show. She hadn't left the farmhouse since the auction. When I arrived at the property, scorched earth greeted me. The metal from the gates was twisted like ribbon. Black soot clung to the wind. Roy sat by the barn, his hands buried in his face. I stepped out of the car. He looked up. It was deliberate. I know. I didn't think it would come to this. I didn't respond. My eyes swept the damage. What now? He asked. I exhaled. We rebuild. And we make sure this doesn't happen again. That day, I installed 2 more camera systems, doubled the night patrol team, and arranged for motion sensor lights across all major zones. I didn't care about the cost. I cared about the message. We weren't going anywhere. By Thursday, Maya called me back. I think I've got something. I put her on speaker while poring over restoration invoices. You remember Brandon Foss? I paused. Diane's cousin? Yeah, did 2 years in county for insurance fraud, used to do cattle runs for Roy, got fired last year. I closed my laptop. Why him? He fits the profile. Walk, height, build. And he just bought gas 2 hours before the fire from the station 5 miles out. Paid cash, no loyalty card. Security camera shows him in a hoodie. My blood iced. Can we prove it? Working on it. I'm sending you the footage. The moment I opened the video, I knew it was him. Same limp, same left-handed gait. A scar visible above his collar, where he once burned himself welding a cattle gate. I remembered it from a Christmas years ago. I called the sheriff's department myself. They picked him up by sundown. The next day, Diane came to my shop. I wasn't expecting her. She walked in like she still owned every square inch of the town. Head held high, pearls gleaming, despite the black circles under her eyes. Is it true? She asked. I didn't look up from the saddle I was repairing. What? You had Brandon arrested. I turned to her, slow, measured. I had a criminal arsonist arrested, one who cost us thousands in damages and killed livestock. He's family. I set the saddle down. So am I. Or did you forget that? Her jaw clenched. You did this, she said, voice trembling. You pushed us too far. You humiliated us. Brandon just reacted. I stood up. No, Brandon made a choice, like I made a choice to buy the farm, like you made a choice to laugh at me for 3 years. Actions have consequences, Diane. And if your cousin wanted to settle a score, he picked the wrong damn woman. Her lip trembled. I thought I could scare you back into place, she whispered. I blinked. She met my gaze squarely. Brandon didn't act alone, she said. I asked him to make a statement. My stomach dropped. What? Her voice cracked. I didn't mean for it to go that far. I told him to damage something, not hurt anyone. I thought if the farm looked unstable, you'd sell it back. Give it up. My hand gripped the edge of the counter. You admitted arson. No, she cried. I didn't light the fire. I didn't even know when he was gonna do it. But I planted the seed. I begged him to scare you, to make you rethink. I stepped around the counter, standing inches from her. You're going to the sheriff, I said, and you're going to tell him exactly what you just told me. She shook her head violently. They'll arrest me. I nodded. Yes, and they should. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I didn't want to lose everything. I must have stared at that letter for a solid 5 minutes without blinking. The handwriting was jagged, like the pen had been pressed too hard. The envelope was unmarked. No post office stamp, just my name in that same clawing script, Marin's. Luke walked in from the barn, brushing dust from his jacket. You okay? I didn't look up, I just held out the letter. He read it, lips tightening. You think this was over a farm? He repeated. It wasn't Brandon, I said. And it wasn't my mother. We locked eyes. Then who? He asked. I didn't have an answer, but I knew we had to find one, and fast. We called a private investigator that same day. Maya vetted him personally. Used him before during a product leak back in Memphis. His name was Carter Jennings. 60, quiet, and wore his skepticism like an overcoat. I'll need access to your mail logs, phone records, and any footage from the last 2 weeks, he said, voice flat but efficient. You think it's a stalker? I asked. I think it's someone who thinks they know you, or wants you to think that. Could be intimidation, could be something else. He took the letter into evidence, photographed it, bagged it, promised to get back in 48 hours. I didn't sleep again that night. Every creak of the house sounded different. Every flicker of wind against the windows felt like someone watching. Luke stayed up with me, both of us on the couch, neither of us speaking much. Just waiting. By morning, the farm's operations couldn't wait. New fencing had arrived, and the fencing crew needed direction. Roy, to my surprise, was already out in the field. We hadn't spoken much since Diane's confession. But today, he gave me a nod. "Don't trust anyone right now," he said, barely above a whisper. "Even old friends?" I didn't know what he meant, but it stuck with me. 2 days later, Carter came back. He laid the evidence out on my desk like puzzle pieces. Security footage from the farm gates, handwriting samples from previous letters, a printed report titled "Targeted Harassment, Non-Familial Origin Suspected." "We have a partial plate from a black pickup truck that circled your shop at night. Same truck was seen near the barn fire site the week before. No match in local records." I leaned forward. "So it's not Brandon's?" "Nope. Different make and model. This one has a broken left taillight. And," he flipped the page, "it's registered under a holding company linked to a man named Douglas Grant." The name hit me like a slap. "Doug Grant?" I whispered. Luke looked confused. "Who's that?" I stood slowly, my knees stiff. "He used to date Diane's sister. Owned half the cattle brokerage Roy used to work with. They had a falling out years ago. Doug always said Roy screwed him out of a land deal." Carter nodded. "According to some whispers, Doug's been trying to buy Hartley land for over a decade. Roy wouldn't sell. But he knew the financials were in bad shape." "Why would he come after me?" I asked. "Because you bought what he couldn't. And you embarrassed Diane. 2 birds, 1 stone." I sat down hard. "Is he dangerous?" Carter hesitated. "Vindictive. Maybe worse. I've dug into him. He's got sealed records in 3 counties. Property disputes. Physical altercations. Nothing that stuck, but enough to raise flags." "What do we do?" Luke asked. "We prepare." Carter handed me a burner phone. "If anything else shows up, letters, gifts, threats, you call me first. Not the sheriff, not the media, me." I nodded. "Keep this quiet," he added. "Doug doesn't play fair. If he knows you're watching, he'll vanish." I tucked the phone away. My hands were shaking again. That weekend, we kept everything running like normal. Deliveries went out. Cattle rotation stayed on schedule. Luke started sleeping with a shotgun near the door. Maya set up a private communications server for internal security. But I was unraveling. Every time I walked to the barn, I imagined a rifle scope aimed at me. Every time I unlocked the shop, I hesitated, half expecting another shattered window. Then, on Sunday, it escalated. A package arrived. No label, no return address. Inside, a piece of scorched leather. It was from my shop. One of the boots I'd repaired, something I recognized from my workbench. The heel was melted. A single word was carved into the sole with a knife. Something I dropped it. Luke found me 5 minutes later, frozen in the living room. "We're calling Carter," he said. Carter arrived within an hour, examined the leather, took photos. Then he looked up. "This isn't random. He's telling you he knows your work, your patterns, your materials." "He's watching the shop," I whispered. "More than that," Carter said. "He's studying you." Luke looked ready to explode. "We should confront him." "No," Carter said sharply. "That's what he wants. He wants you to go on the offensive. He wants chaos. If you want to beat him, you have to be precise." I looked down at the leather. Undone. Not destroyed, not ruined. Kuntan. It was personal. Psychological. This man didn't just want the farm. He wanted me broken, dismantled, shaken until I folded. And that's when I made my decision. We were going to flip the game. I called Maya that night and told her to put together a file, everything we had on Doug Grant. past disputes, complaints, business partners, especially his failed land acquisitions. Then I contacted an old friend from university, Audra, a real estate litigator who owed me a favor. If I gave you proof someone was sabotaging a business to force a sale, could we open a federal case? I asked. Depends, she said. But if there's a pattern and across state lines, you've got racketeering, maybe even land fraud. Good, I said. Because I think we're sitting on enough to bury this guy. I met Carter the next day. We set up bait, new land listings, fake online business dissolutions. Rumors planted in just the right circles. Doug Grant would hear it through the grapevine, that I was folding, that the farm was in financial chaos, that our Chicago distributor had backed out. All lies, but all believable enough to tempt him out of hiding. And it worked. 3 days later, Carter intercepted a communication between one of Doug's proxies and a known real estate buyer. Doug was preparing to make an offer. We let him think he could. I even left town for a night, publicly, had Maya post that I was visiting family upstate. Meanwhile, I stayed in a private suite, monitoring everything remotely. That same night, someone broke into my shop. But this time, Carter had the cameras. And this time, we had enough. The next morning, Doug Grant was arrested for felony trespassing, vandalism, and suspected coercion with intent to extort. Carter turned over every shred of evidence to the county sheriff. Luke and I watched from the back seat of Carter's car as they cuffed him. He didn't struggle. He just stared directly at the cruiser I was in. He smiled. I felt the ice crawl down my back. But Carter leaned forward. "That smile?" he said. "That's the smile of a man who just lost." And for the first time in weeks, I believed him. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. Because I wasn't done yet. Doug Grant was behind bars. But the real challenge was just beginning. Turning a legacy into a future, and making sure no one could ever take it again. Carrot to be continued. Those 17 top carrots at Vieway. The news spread fast. Doug Grant's mugshot was on the front page of the Kessler County Chronicle the next morning, right beneath the headline. Tom's asterisk. Prominent land developer arrested in farm sabotage plot, asterisk. Subhead. Hartley Farms' new owner linked to criminal investigation that exposed years-long coercion scheme. I read it from the porch, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. The article didn't just cover his arrest. It unearthed his entire history. The property fraud in Arkansas. The shell companies in Georgia. Even the ghost LLCs linked to other landowners who'd gone mysteriously bankrupt. And suddenly, I wasn't just a woman who bought her in-laws' farm. I was a woman who'd dismantled a local villain. Reporters started calling. I turned them down. TV stations reached out for interviews. I turned them down too. Not because I didn't want to talk, but because I wasn't done building yet. Let them wait until they had something real to talk about. 2 weeks after the arrest, our Chicago distributor confirmed the first shipment. 3 semi-trucks. High-end, grass-fed beef processed and packed on-site at our new facility. I had the team pose for a photo in front of the loading dock. Maya framed it and gave it to me with a note. Asterisk. From ashes to empire. Asterisk. We hung it in the office. Roy didn't come to the photo shoot. He still kept to himself mostly. Working, but distant. Quiet. I caught him more than once staring out across the pasture with a strange, unreadable look in his eyes. I asked him once if he wanted to talk. He said, "Not yet." Fair enough. Luke, meanwhile, had settled into his role as farm operations lead better than I could have imagined. He'd spent his life in the dirt and sun. It suited him. But now, he walked with confidence. With purpose. Because this time he was building something alongside me, not beneath someone else's shadow. One night we sat out on the porch watching the last of the trucks disappear into the horizon. "You ever think we'd get here?" he asked. I shook my head. "I thought I'd fix boots until I was 80. He took my hand. "You still could." "Yeah," I smiled, But now I fix farms too." We laughed, soft and tired, the kind of laugh that comes only after the storm has passed. Diane wrote me a letter. It was 5 pages long. I opened it on a Sunday morning while Luke was tending the cattle. Her handwriting was still neat, perfect even, but smaller now, like she'd shrunk between the lines. She didn't apologize, not really, but she admitted things. "I resented you," one line said, "because you reminded me of what I could have been if I'd fought harder." Another, "I thought power meant control, but you taught me it means something else entirely." The last page had no threats, no bitterness, just a single sentence. Asterisk, asterisk, "I hope you run it better than we did." Asterisk, asterisk. I folded it neatly, tucked it into the same drawer that held the first auction notice. Balance. On the 60th day of their lease, Roy and Diane signed a new long-term agreement. Not tenants, partners. The contract gave them a minority stake in the farm profits, based on productivity, with full audits and oversight. It wasn't a gift, it was earned. Every quarter, they'd report to me. Every project required approval. The land was still mine. But the legacy? That could be shared. Roy didn't say much when he signed, just looked up and said, "You did what none of us could." I didn't reply. I just nodded and extended my hand. He shook it, this time with respect. By week 10, we were receiving inquiries from beyond state lines, restaurant chains, export firms. Even an organic skincare brand wanted to use tallow from our cattle. We couldn't keep up, so I expanded. I bought the adjacent parcel of land, the one Doug tried to grab a decade ago. 200 acres of pasture, untouched, fertile, and filled with potential. Maya cried when she saw the deed. Derek punched the air like a boxer. And me? I just smiled. We broke ground the next day. That night, I walked alone down to the southern fence line. The stars were out, wide and clear. The air smelled like hay and ozone. I closed my eyes. 3 years ago, I was gluing boots under flickering shop lights. 3 months ago, I was planning an anonymous land buyout. Now I stood on 400 acres of redemption. We held a town harvest festival to celebrate, a mix of old Kessler tradition and new Hartley vision. Barbecue, hay rides, a pop-up booth for our brand. Local farmers and neighbors brought produce, jam jars, knit crafts. Even Doris from the antique shop brought vintage cookbooks to sell. The farm was thriving, but I wasn't naive enough to think that meant the war was over. Success brings shadows. They creep in the form of competitors, former enemies, and even those who once called you family. And just as the leaves began to turn copper and red, those shadows started to lengthen. The first sign came from the county board. A sudden, unexpected audit notice. It was wrapped in polite bureaucratic language, but the subtext was loud. Someone had requested a full financial and environmental review of Hartley Farms. Maya paced in my office as I read the notice. "This doesn't happen randomly," she said, arms crossed. "Someone pulled strings." "Doug's gone," I said. "Who else would want to sink us now?" She hesitated. "You're not going to like this." I raised an eyebrow. "It's Camille." I blinked. "Your cousin?" She shook her head. "Your former sister-in-law, Luke's brother's ex." I stared. "The marketing exec in Dallas?" "She left Dallas last month, moved to Raleigh. She's now on the board of an agricultural tech startup. They want land." I swore under my breath. "She reached out to the board anonymously," Maya added, "but I traced her email alias. Same one she used in Dallas when she planted press leaks. So now she's aiming at us? She thinks the land is a soft target. She's betting we'll fail inspection and be forced to sell a portion." I stood, grabbed the audit letter and slammed it onto the table. "She thinks wrong." Pant. We mobilized immediately. Derek brought in a certified environmental consultant to walk every inch of the property. Soil samples, runoff reports, cattle impact. Every possible test they could throw at us, we preempted it. Maya dug through every tax return, vendor invoice, and ledger. She even found a minor clerical error in our sales tax filing from the first month. We amended it, submitted it, and paid the fine within 24 hours. No loophole. No vulnerability. I held a full team meeting in the barn loft. Every worker, every manager, every vendor. I stood on a crate and told them the truth. We're under a microscope. If we slip, even once, they'll use it to bleed us out. But if we hold the line, if we shine, we become untouchable. No one flinched. We were a machine now. 3 weeks later, the county officials arrived. 3 suits, 2 clipboards, and 1 silent photographer who documented everything from manure piles to hose pressure. They stayed for 2 days. We gave them access to everything. Transparent, impeccable, by the book. When they left, the lead auditor shook my hand. "You run the tightest farm I've seen in a decade." I didn't smile, I just said, "You'll put that in writing?" He nodded. And within the week, the audit came back. Passed, with distinction. I framed it and hung it in the office, above the old picture of the burned pens. A reminder. Fire hadn't stopped us. Neither would ambition cloaked in boardroom strategy. But Camille wasn't done. Her company began quietly buying parcels outside Kessler. Small ones. Testing the soil. Whispering to landowners about quote, 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 quote. We intercepted 3 such conversations. And then I made a decision that would shake the entire county. I filed to incorporate Hartley Farms as a cooperative land trust, NAMST Cooperative Land Trust. That meant no outside acquisition, no fragmentation, all internal stakeholders. If you worked for us for more than a year, you could buy in. If you leased our land, you could share profits. But no outsider, ever, could buy up pieces and chip us away. The paperwork was brutal. The lawyers were confused. "Are you sure?" one of them asked. "You'd be giving up a level of personal control." I smiled. Good. Because this was never about control. It's about legacy. When it passed and the trust became legal, I stood in the same auction house where I once bought the farm. I faced the press, the community, my crew. And I said, "This land is no longer owned by one person. It belongs to every hand that works it. And no one, no matter how powerful, will ever carve it up again." By early spring, the snow melted into rivulets that fed the soil, the fences held strong against the wind, and for the first time since I bought the farm, the land didn't feel like it was resisting me. It felt like it had accepted me, like I belonged. And that peace, however brief, was its own kind of reward. But peace, as I'd learned, was always the quiet before the next storm. It came in the form of a phone call. "Marin Blakely?" "Yes. This is Deputy U.S. Marshal Jameson Price. I need to discuss something with you. It concerns Douglas Grant." My stomach dropped. "He's in prison," I said. "He's in holding. He hasn't gone to trial yet, and he's asked to speak with you, off the record." I was silent for a long time. "He claims he has information regarding additional threats to your property, ones unrelated to his actions." "What kind of threats?" "Financial, possibly criminal. He says he's willing to testify if you agree to meet him." I knew it was dangerous. I knew it was likely manipulative. But I also knew one thing with absolute certainty. Doug Grant didn't bluff unless he was holding something real. I met him at the county detention center. No cameras, no press. Just a steel table, fluorescent lights, and 2 guards. Doug looked older, thinner, but the gleam in his eyes was the same. "You look good, Marin," he said, voice raspier than I remembered. "You don't," I replied. He chuckled. "Still sharp. Still in custody." He leaned forward. "I know you think you've won. But this isn't over. Not because of me. Because of what I found before I ever tried to buy that land." I said nothing. There's an old land file, buried under the name O'Connell Trust. It predates your purchase. Filed in 1972, it was never resolved. And it claims legal ownership over 80 acres of what you now call your southern pasture. My mouth went dry. Why didn't you bring this up during your last stunt? Because I was saving it, leverage. But now I want a deal. I hand over everything I have on it, including the forged survey maps, and you testify to reduce my sentence. I stared at him. You want me to help you walk free, so you can tell me how my farm might not be mine? He shrugged. That's the price of peace, sweetheart. I left without answering. By the time I returned to the office, Carter was already waiting. He raised an eyebrow the moment he saw my face. Bad news? Potentially catastrophic, I said. He says 80 acres might not legally belong to us. Maya overheard from the hallway. She walked in slowly. Is he bluffing? I don't think so. Derek joined us. What's our move? I looked around the room. The people who had helped me build this, who had given their sweat and hands and faith to something bigger. And I said, we fight. Land. We dove into property archives like archaeologists. Carter filed public records requests. Maya traced trust names through old microfiche reels at the courthouse. Even Diane helped. She remembered a lawsuit decades ago involving a family named O'Connell, something Roy's father had once buried with cash and influence. Within days we found it. A son of time, yes, but based on a forged deed. And buried with it, the original survey. Filed in Roy's father's handwriting. Unrecorded. Unacknowledged. And real. Meaning those 80 acres had always legally belonged to the Hartleys, but had never been officially registered. The land was ours. But we had no paper to prove it. Doug had seen the vulnerability, held on to it, waited for the moment it would cost the most. And that moment was now. Luke and I stood on that southern pasture 2 days later, maps and old documents clutched in our hands. If we lose this land, he said, we lose the entire trust model. I nodded, which means we lose everything. I closed my eyes. Then I made the second most dangerous decision of my life. We were going to go public. I called a town hall meeting. Every investor, every tenant, every stakeholder. I stood at the front of the old Kessler Community Center beneath yellow lights and a sagging flag. And I told them the truth. There is a claim on part of this land, a real one, but it's based on deception, on fraud, and we intend to fight it. But we may lose. Gasps. Whispers. Someone asked, what happens to our shares? We keep going, I said, because this land isn't just soil, it's people, and I don't build things that fall easily. The room was silent. And then someone clapped. Then another. And another. Until the entire hall was standing. The next day, we filed suit. Audra flew in to handle the legal firepower. We submitted every scrap of evidence, every affidavit, every witness. Even Diane gave a sworn statement, admitting her father-in-law's cover-up. The case was accepted for expedited review. We'd know the ruling in under 6 weeks. Until then, we kept building. We didn't stop. Because if I'd learned anything, it was that forward motion is the only antidote to fear. And then, just as the final week ticked by, I got a call. From a name I hadn't heard in years. Karen O'Connell. Daughter of the original land claimant. I read about the trust. About what you're building, she said, and I think my father lied. Silence. I have documents, originals, I want to meet. Why? I asked. Because your fight gave me the courage to stop running from the past. And because it's time someone did the right thing. I met her the next day in a diner 2 towns over. She handed me a folder. Inside, the original unaltered survey map. A confession letter from her father. A notarized declaration relinquishing all future claim. I nearly wept. Why now? I asked. She smiled. Because someone finally made this land feel like it belonged to all of us. We withdrew the lawsuit, filed the new deed, registered every document. The 80 acres were now legally, officially, and eternally part of Hartley Farms Trust. No one could ever touch it again. And I sent Doug Grant a single envelope in response. A copy of the notarized deed. Tucked inside was a yellow post-it note. Nice try. M***. Back on the farm, Luke found me that night in the barn, brushing down the horses. He leaned in, kissed my forehead. You did it. I smiled. No, I said, we did. And above us the stars gleamed across a sky that no longer watched in silence. It watched in awe. To be continued, Snitchy Lamorus. The day the official deed came through, I stood in the southern field and planted a single wooden post. On it, carved in ironwood, were the words, times * hours, forever, *. It was more than land. It was lineage made right. History rewritten. But as I hammered the post into the soil, I couldn't help but think of how far we'd come, and how thin the line had always been between ownership and survival. Between being seen and being erased. The farm thrived in the months that followed. We launched a youth agriculture apprenticeship, bringing in teens from surrounding counties to learn soil health, drone mapping, and rotational grazing. The online store broke 6 figures in under 90 days, and our soap brand got picked up by a regional boutique chain that specialized in ethical, woman-owned businesses. People started calling me by a title I never imagined, CEO. But I never let go of the first title that mattered, cobbler. I still fixed boots. Once a week, minimum. It reminded me of where I started, who I'd been, and why none of this came easy. Diane and Roy adjusted. Slowly but surely. Roy ran equipment checks every morning and even learned how to use the inventory software Maya installed. Diane took over the seed library in town, organizing swaps and holding canning classes in the old dairy building we'd converted into a community center. She no longer called what I did small, and she never once asked for a discount on lease payments. But perhaps the biggest change was between her and Luke. One night, I walked in on the two of them sitting on the porch swing, sipping iced tea. No harsh words, no tension, just quiet. I stood in the doorway, listening. I think she saved all of us, Diane said. Luke replied, no, she rebuilt all of us. I turned away before they noticed me, smiling. Ligerby. We hired more staff, bought 2 more adjacent fields. Partnered with a local university to do a sustainability case study on our co-op model. And Carter, who had originally just been my private investigator, stayed on as our official director of security. He took the job without fanfare. And installed 3 more cameras, just in case. I don't trust quiet seasons, he said. That's when the wolves sniff the fences. But for a while the fences held. Until the letter arrived. It was addressed not to me but to Luke. Hand-delivered. From a law firm in Dallas. He opened it slowly, sitting on the edge of our bed. His fingers trembled. What is it? I asked. His face paled. It's from my brother. I blinked. Micah? He's suing me. For defamation and emotional distress. Claims our story, everything we've done, has damaged his career and reputation. I took the letter. It was real. And worse, he wasn't just suing Luke. He was going after the Comptricetta Hartley Farms Cooperative Trust. I called a team meeting. No delay, no panic. Just war room precision. Maya reviewed the claims. Audra flew in again. Carter flagged the social accounts Micah referenced in his evidence packet. This is what he's using, Carter said, scrolling. Posts about the farm, comments made on your public interviews, mentions of how your in-laws treated you. He's claiming libel by association. I exhaled. It's a long shot, Audra said. He has no real damages. But if this gets to discovery, it could force us to release internal documents. He wants to shake the tree and hope something falls. So we hold the branches, I said. Maya nodded. No loose roots. The suit triggered more than just paperwork. Suddenly, news stations started poking again. "This is just petty family drama," one headline read. Or is it a battle over the future of agricultural wealth? And just like that, we weren't a redemption arc anymore. We were a fight story again. But that's fine. I know how to fight. Audra filed a motion to dismiss within 72 hours. Included a 20-page rebuttal, affidavits from local leaders, and a deposition offer with time-stamped contradictions from Micah's own public interviews. Then we did something bold. We released a video. No drama, no insults. Just a tour. Of the farm, the staff, the programs, the kids learning to grow tomatoes in the greenhouse. Diane showing a group of first graders how to churn butter. And I narrated it myself. This is what we built, together. Every family has history, ours has healing, and that's not something anyone can sue into silence. The video went viral. By week's end, Micah's own PR team released a statement distancing him from the lawsuit. His attorneys, quote, withdrew representation. The case crumbled. Luke didn't celebrate. He just stood in the pasture, staring at the horizon. There's a strange kind of silence that settles after a war. Not peace, not quite. More like the hush of a held breath. The part where the air waits to see if you've really won. That's what it felt like in the weeks after Micah's lawsuit collapsed. Like the land itself was watching, and wondering if I'd earned it. We didn't slow down. There wasn't time. Spring melted into early summer, and with it came the rain. The kind of downpour that flattened fence posts and turned pastures to mud. We had drainage issues in the western field, erosion damage near the North Creek, and a fungal outbreak in 2 of the tomato greenhouses. It would have broken us a year ago. But not now. We rerouted water systems, reinforced the fencing, switched crops to a resilient varietal. Derek brought in a hydroponics expert from the university. Maya rewrote the entire produce logistics system in under 3 days. And me? I worked. Not just at the desk. In the mud, with the crew, shoveling, hauling, stitching torn shade cloth with the same hands I once used to repair leather. I came home every night with dirt in my hair and calluses I hadn't felt since my shop days. It felt good. It felt real. One night, Luke sat beside me on the porch with 2 cups of coffee. "We're getting offers again," he said. My head tilted. From who? 3 national chains. One of them wants a controlling interest. Another wants to license the Hartley name. I didn't reply. He handed me the papers. Millions. In guaranteed capital, shares, a chance to walk away rich. Luke looked down at the steam rising from his mug. "You could take it," he said. "You could finally rest." But I shook my head. This was never about resting. He nodded. "Just wanted you to know you had the option." "I do," I said. Then I handed the contracts back. "But I've already built something bigger than money." At the start of July, we got an invitation. A national agriculture conference in Seattle. They wanted me to speak. Panel title: Women Reshaping the Rural Economy. I hesitated. Crowds weren't my thing, cameras even less. But Maya grabbed my shoulders and said, "You are going, you tiny tinen my the headline." So I went. The auditorium was huge, hundreds of faces. Lights like interrogation beams. I stood behind a podium in boots that still bore a patch of farm mud. And I told them the truth. Not just the story of buying the farm, but the German to why. The humiliation. The laughter. The fire. The letter. Doug. Micah. All of it. I told them what it means to rebuild when you were never supposed to be holding the hammer. What it feels like to own something that others said you weren't worthy of. When I finished, the crowd was silent. And then they rose. All of them. Standing ovation. One woman in the front row had tears on her cheeks. Another held her daughter's hand. A man near the back whispered, "Thank you." And that night, for the first time, I let myself cry. Not from fear, not from exhaustion. From recognition. When I came home, the farm had thrown a surprise party. Banners strung across the barn. Knight Asterisk, our Marshal of the Mud. Welcome back, Marin. Astra ist free O's. Luke grilled. Diane made pies. Roy poured whiskey and toasted me. Asterisk, to the best damn boss I never expected to respect. We laughed for hours. And at one point, I stepped away from the noise. I walked to the fence line, the one I fixed myself. I leaned against it. And I whispered to the dark, "Thank you." Not to anyone in particular. Just to the land. To the journey. To the woman I became. Later that night, as the party quieted and the music faded, Luke found me again. He wrapped his arms around me from behind and whispered, "You know what we haven't done yet?" "What's that?" I asked. He turned me toward him, took out a small, weathered box. Inside, a new ring. Emerald, set in reclaimed wood and gold. "For the woman who built everything," he said, "let's renew our vows." I couldn't speak. I just nodded. And we stood there, under the stars, the air humming with the electricity of all we'd survived. A week later, we held the ceremony under the same oak tree where Derek married Amara. Just the crew, family, neighbors. I wore a dress stitched by a local artisan. Luke wore a borrowed vest. Diane officiated. She barely got through the vows without crying. When it was over, Roy hugged me. We signed the heritage certification on a Saturday. By Monday, the calls started. The federal recognition had triggered a wave of attention: documentary crews, podcast invites, nonprofit partnerships, even a book agent who claimed she could get my story on the New York Times list. I ignored most of it. Not because I didn't care, but because the only legacy I was interested in was the one I could touch with my own hands. Soil under my nails. A steady heartbeat in the rhythm of sunrise and irrigation. Still, one letter stood out. Not a media request. A handwritten envelope. Inside, a note from a woman named Lucinda Brower. She ran a small co-op initiative in rural Montana. It read, "Times asterisk. I don't want your money. I want your model. Please help us survive. Asterisk." And beneath it, in delicate script, "Times asterisk. We believe in what you built, but we need to believe it can be done again. Asterisk." I held that letter for a long time and realized this wasn't the end. This was expansion. We hosted Lucinda 3 weeks later. She arrived with 2 assistants, notebooks in hand, nerves vibrating through every word. We gave her full access to everything: our bylaws, cooperative structure, payroll templates, sustainability models. Her eyes welled up halfway through our financial planning module. "No one's ever shared this with us," she said. "Everyone hoards, you give." I smiled, because someone has to be the blueprint, and if I don't share it, who will? She left with a full packet and a promise. She'd return in 6 months with her first co-op signed. She did it in 4. The rest followed. A woman from Tennessee, a rancher from Nevada, an indigenous seed saver from Arizona who taught Churtsunas Anjnos more than we taught her. We built a coalition, informal at first, a name scribbled on whiteboards. Then official. Knox, the Blakely-Hartley Alliance for Cooperative Agriculture. It sounded fancy, but really it was just people helping people build futures that couldn't be stolen. Maya oversaw structure. Luke ran travel workshops. Derek developed a virtual field management program that let members share crop rotation maps. I gave talks, small, focused, raw. One woman called it Church for Women Who Farm. I laughed, then cried, because I understood exactly what she meant. One crisp October morning, A bus arrived. 35 students from a high school entrepreneurship program. Mostly girls, mostly quiet, until they saw the barn, the fields, the greenhouse, the new tech lab we'd built in the old hay shed. They exploded with questions. How'd you learn this? Did you have money? Wasn't your family against you? And one brave girl in the back raised her hand and asked, Did you ever feel like quitting? I paused. Yes, I said. All the time, and I almost did. But then I remembered that the only people who want you to quit are the ones who can't stand to see you succeed, so I stayed. She nodded. And later that day she gave me a drawing of the farm, colored pencil. You made this, it read, so someday I can make mine. I pinned it in my office, right next to the photo of me at the auction. Micah never showed his face again. Doug's sentencing came and went. 7 years federal with no parole. He sent one last letter. Just 3 words. Himes asterisk, you won. Fine. Asterisk. I burned it. Not out of rage, but because fire, when controlled, is cleansing. At the end of the season, we held our first annual Hartley Harvest Gala. Black tie optional. Barn cleaned top to bottom. Hay bales transformed into lounge seating, twinkling lights, a jazz trio from the city, food catered by our co-op families. Diane even wore heels for the first time since I'd known her. We didn't charge admission. Instead, we auctioned promises. One-on-one mentorship with Maya, a tour of Derek's precision planting system, Luke's handmade cedar planter boxes. And me? A year of consulting with any startup co-op brave enough to try. We raised $183,000 that night. Every dollar went to the Alliance. The next day, I found Roy sitting by the barn early, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise. You've changed everything, he said. Not alone, I replied. He nodded. But you lit the match. Late one evening, I returned to the shop. Not the big office, the old one. My cobbler bench. The cracked stool, the smell of glue, the hum of the old lamp. And I found a note tucked in the drawer. I hadn't seen it in years. A letter I wrote to myself the night after Luke told me his parents thought I was resourceful. Comte Maastricht? They don't see you, but you will show them, not with words, with worth. Asterisk. I smiled. They had seen me. Everyone had. And more importantly, I saw myself.